It's no secret that fans really don't like the 5th story arc of Persona 5. There are 3 main reasons for this, being the questionable writing, confusing dungeon layout, and the infamous boss fight which has crushed the soul of every casual player it comes across. I'm going to go over each aspect of Okumura's arc to finally answer the question, was Okumura really that bad? To catch you up on the story, Futaba was able to hack into Medjed, which had threatened all of Japan with economic destruction unless the Phantom Thieves turned themselves into the police. This further boosted the group's popularity with the public, which sees it rise to an all-time high. However, this fame does not come without consequences. On the fan site, where people post their requests for heart changes online, the name Kunikazu Okumura skyrockets to the top of this leaderboard, with allegations of gross employee abuse, such as horrid work conditions, pitiful pay, and brutally long hours. Due to data taken from Sai Nijima's laptop, the thieves discover that a lot of Okumura's business competitors began to suffer mental shutdowns, all of which just so happened to directly benefit Okumura's bottom line. With there being very good reason to suspect Okumura, Futaba puts his name into the Metaverse Navigator, and it's a hit. He has a palace. Standard stuff so far, but now here's the bad part. Both Ryuji and Morgana are very keen on the idea of infiltrating this palace straight away and stealing his heart, but the rest of the group are hesitant on the idea, with them not personally knowing enough about him to immediately come to a decision on what to do about this. How does Morgana respond to this? He calls the group a bunch of pussies, tells Ryuji to kill himself, then fucks off. Okay, slight exaggeration, but this is kind of how it felt when I was going through this. The only one on Morgana's side in this argument is Ryuji, yet he completely dunks on him for no reason whatsoever. I don't know, this whole conflict just feels kind of forced. This is quite literally the only time the Phantom Thieves have disagreed on target, and Morgana immediately throws a fit, then storms off. To catch you up, he's so eager to take Okumura's heart because he feels his usefulness to the team is dwindling, so Morgana feels the need to prove his worth to the team inside of the metaverse, which was never really a strong suit to begin with. This insecurity of his is kind of built up throughout Futaba's arc, with little one-off comments about Morgana being useless and that weird nightmare cutscene. However, we really weren't shown enough for this to warrant that kind of reaction from him. The whole thing just escalates way too quickly. Anyway, after Morgana leaves, they stretch this out over the course of a few in-game days, with it ultimately coming to a close when the group saves Haru from her rapey fiancé. Morgana admits his insecurity to the group, while they all tell him that his specific usefulness in the navigation/advisory role doesn't matter to them, because he's a treasured friend first and foremost. And that's the setup to Okumura's palace. I don't even think this writing is terrible, it's just okay. But when you compare this half-assed feud to what came before it, it pales in comparison. It's clear to see why many players had a bad taste in the mouth when heading into the palace, but who knows? Maybe the Spaceport of Greed's layout can redeem this arc from mediocrity and stand toe-to-toe with some of the game's best dungeons it can't. Now for this section, I feel it's important that I share some information on my background with this game. I'm someone who's very experienced with Persona 5. I've sunk well over 1,000 hours into this game across its many different versions, and that obviously means I'm going to be very fluent with the game's dungeon design and combat system. So something I find to be easy may actually be Newton's hidden fourth law to someone else. With that in mind, let's start with the dungeon layout. And you know what? It's decent stuff. The first area worth noting is the barracks. This area is littered with locked doors that can only be opened with the use of ranked keycards, dropped from the robotic workers. The gimmick here is that each rank of keycard has 3 or 4 robots that could potentially be holding it. You'll never know which one has it just by looking, as they all have the exact same design. So what you're supposed to do is talk to these robots to obtain information such as their elemental weaknesses, as well as the personality of the robot that has the card you need to progress, so that you can track down the right one. You'll do this around 3 times before you move on to the next area. This gimmick might sound cool to you, but there is nothing stopping you from just fighting a random one and praying it has the card. I mean, these fights aren't exactly challenging, and if you guess wrong, then it's just more EXP for you. Overall, decent start to the palace. It's basically just Persona 5 combat, and if my playtime didn't make it apparent enough, I like Persona 5's combat. Now, the next area worth noting is the production line. You can interact with these terminals to put the factory on lunch break. This pauses the hydraulic presses for 30 seconds, allowing you to walk across them to reach previously inaccessible areas. I went into this playthrough with really bad memories of this place, and I really can't remember why. It's not a revolutionary puzzle by any means, but it definitely gets the job done. But my god, did the mini-boss at the end of this section fuck me up. I have no one but myself to blame for this. I went into this fight with low SP and AI tactics for the party members. Already off to a bleak start. These guys will use Matarunda and Masukunda, making my attacks unlikely to hit, and even if they do hit, they deal shit damage. Now with the exception of one wave, all the robots are weak to psychic damage, but me, in my infinite wisdom, decided to sub out Haru, who can consistently use psychic damage, for Arn, who can barely scrape damage numbers above 60. This fight continues to drag on for a few minutes, until I decide to stop being a cheap bastard and just use an SP item on Haru so she can actually afford to attack. That was way harder than it needed to be. Anyway, once you make it through there, you come face to face with the most infamous part of Persona 5's dungeon design, Okumura's maze. And honestly, it's probably my favourite part of the palace. By looking at the map, you can see which airlocks are activated and which ones aren't by the brightness of the colour, as well as the airlock switches themselves being marked on the map. As long as you're paying attention to that, it's fairly easy to see where you can go and where you're expected to go. Not to mention the fact that this section really isn't even that long. It consists of just 2 areas, with the first one being more of a tutorial to the gimmick than an actual puzzle in its own right. I can imagine many people got stuck here because they tried to brute force their way through it instead of taking the time to look at the minimap. However, as I said before, I do have a lot of experience with this game, so take everything I just said with a grain of salt. And that's the end of the palace. I don't really think this dungeon deserves all of the hate it gets. It's not the best dungeon I've ever played, but I never really found myself getting bored in here. There was never that one section I just dread to play again like there are in some other palaces. It's overall high quality stuff, and I think if more people gave the maze in particular a second look, they'd probably agree with me. However, if mediocre writing and a semi-difficult maze were the only things people had issues with, I wouldn't be making this video. The most infamous part of the game's 5th story arc is its boss fight. The Shadow Okumura battle is the cause of many first-time players' frustration with the game due to its seemingly brutal difficulty. To find out why this is the case, we're going to need to backtrack all the way to Kamoshida's palace. On the first proper visit to the palace, the game will give you a tutorial on how baton passing works. I'm sure you're all fully aware of this mechanic, but in short, knock an enemy down, pass to someone else to deal higher damage. If you do that 3 times in a row, your skill will cost nothing and deal much higher damage. Now here's the problem. Outside of this tutorial, I genuinely cannot remember a single point past this where you are ever required to do that. You can very much get away with just knocking all enemies down, all out attacking, and moving on with your life. This strategy of knocking everything down then using an all-out attack has worked for 4 consecutive dungeons, so it's practically molded into the player's brain at this point. But in the Okumura fight, you cannot perform an all-out attack. You have to take them down with your Persona skills alone. What's more, you have to defeat these waves of robots within 2 turns, because on the 3rd one, they will flee and reset the wave with full HP. But wait, there's more. This fight has a 30-minute time limit, and if that clock runs out, this happens. But wait, there's more. Okumura will be sat there in the background throwing defense debuffs at your party members, then telling the bots to target that party member till they die, meaning you have to worry about your own survival, as well as keeping up the pressure with damage. But wait, there's more. Okumura can also cast Rakukaja on a random bot. This can completely fuck you over, as the damage reduction from this buff is so high that you're not going to be able to kill it in time, which will reset the wave with full HP, and puts more of a drain on the boom clock. But as one last fuck you from Atlas, Okumura can cast Sacrifice Order on a bot, which will make it explode on its next turn. So you have to kill it before it can explode. If you don't, this happens. It's bad. Well, Arn's dead. Whoa! With everything I've just said, you may think that the Dark Souls devs decided to make a turn-based RPG. But there's a silver lining to all of this. Baton passing and gun damage. Basically, what you're supposed to do, instead of using something like Magaru to knock all the enemies down at once, is use single target spells and items to knock enemies down one at a time, so you can build up your baton pass to either Haru or Joker, who can then nuke all of the enemies with gun damage. I specifically say gun damage because none of the robot waves have any resistance to it whatsoever. I personally did this on hard mode, but if all of that sounds like too much work, you can always just crank the difficulty slider down, and then pull out Izanagi no Okami from the compendium for free, and just click this 7 times in a row. And that's the Okumura fight. As far as my thoughts on the boss fight go, I think it's pretty good. It's the only encounter that flat out requires you to take advantage of the baton pass mechanic to its full extent. It gets such a bad reputation, and I really don't think it deserves it. The issue with this boss fight wasn't the difficulty being too high, it was the rest of the game never requiring you to actually engage with its mechanics. I'm worried that the backlash from fans at this boss fight is only encouraging Atlas to continue making the Persona series a more forgiving experience, and having played Persona 3 Reload, I don't think my fears are dumbfounded. What are my thoughts on the arc overall? I think it's good. The writing was a poor attempt at adding internal drama to the game, but the dungeon itself is more of what we had in the previous palaces, which is high quality yet beginner friendly puzzles. and it caps off with a boss fight that really tests your understanding of the game's central mechanic. It's definitely overhated, but when you compare the entire package to what comes both before and after it, it's easy to see why some people really don't think highly of the Spaceport of Greed. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw here, consider subscribing to my channel to find more content from me. Also, whilst getting footage for this video, I was actually live streaming the entire time. And I don't just mean Okumura's Palace. I've been streaming the entire game up to this point over on my second channel. I also cover other games on there too, with me recently finishing both Persona 4 Golden and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. If that's something you're interested in, then consider tuning into my second channel to catch my live playthroughs of games. The links to both my second channel, TikTok account, and my Twitter page can be found in the description below.